Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pete Pinnell, and I'm delighted today to be able to introduce Taylor Sijan. Taylor's a student at the University of Nebraska with us in our graduate program. She earned her BFA from Bowling Green State University, where she emphasized ceramics and metalsmithing. Then she spent 2 years with a postbac at Wichita State University. Yay, Wichita. During her first year of graduate school, she's been exploring the relationships of fluid pottery forms and rich layered surfaces, and she's very interested in her career in helping to provide information to students and artists to help them cultivate a career in ceramics. And so this talk, I think, is all about that. So it's my honor to introduce Taylor Sijan.
Thanks for coming, everyone. I'm excited to share these skills with you today. This project was made possible in part thanks to support from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Hickson Lied College of Fine and Performing Arts Endowment Fund. So I was originally going to be doing these demonstrations live, but because I can't download the software onto the laptop that they're using to project, I'm going to voice over some pre-recorded videos. So please save your questions till the end of the presentation. Thank you. We live in a world of images. Right now, most of the time when people are exposed to our new work, it's through a two-dimensional image that we've shared through the internet. And when we take our three-dimensional work and flatten it in this way, the details are incredibly important and they can easily be lost or distorted for the amateur photographer. This was definitely a problem for me when I was a student in undergrad. I emphasized in three-dimensional art, so photography was not a part of our curriculum. And when it came time for application season, the photographs that I had been taking were fairly mediocre, and it was only by discovering post-production editing in Lightroom that I was able to create a portfolio that was attractive and suitable for applications. Due to the limited length of this presentation, we will focus on portfolio photography suited for juried applications. These are typically photographed on a gray, white, or graduated backdrop that showcases the work in a straightforward way. This is not going to be a tutorial on how to take the perfect photograph, and I will not be focusing on how to operate a digital camera. I encourage you to go onto YouTube and Google what your specific camera model is to familiarize yourself with your equipment and shooting in manual mode as best as you can before diving into editing. What I will show you is my approach to taking an amateur photograph and making it great by editing it. You need to decide what color background is going to work best for your needs. It's based not only on your personal preference, but also what your images are going to be used for. So for example, if you want your object to be seamlessly integrated into a website or a print article, you might want to use a white background. It's important to note that when you are using the white background, it is just as important to not only light your piece, but also light the background as well to blow it out as much as possible before you take that photograph. The gray or graduated backdrops, so where it goes from dark to light, are more commonly used for academic portfolios and submissions to juried exhibitions. These neutral backgrounds are classic, but they're also considered to be easy on the eyes for people who have to sit there and look through thousands of photographs as they're jurying a show. So you might want to consider photographing on a neutral tone background like this. But no matter what color you decide, you want to make sure that your backdrop is hung from the wall in a seamless arc without any horizontal lines or sagging, or that might end up showing up later in your photographs. When I light my pieces, if I'm using that gray backdrop, I will push the piece back as far as I can while still having the back lip of the piece lit. and I tilt the overhead light toward myself where I'm photographing, this will help create that black background at the top of your image behind your piece. And I always set my camera on a tripod, and I have my camera set to a 3-second self-timer for each photo. This is so that after I click the button, my hands don't jostle the camera on accident and accidentally make this photograph blurry. And you can get away with shooting on an iPhone, but it is far better to invest in a digital camera so that you are able to shoot RAW format. RAW format, as opposed to JPEG, has a lot more information packed into it. The files are very large. As you're editing, you're actually causing some damage to your pixels. So if you start with a lower quality image like a JPEG and then you keep editing it, you will end up getting pixelation and graininess in your photos that you wouldn't have to deal with if you shot in RAW. So as I mentioned earlier, you got to play with the angle of that overhead light. The image on the left you can see has this horizon line where there's this abrupt transition, and it's not quite as seamless as you would want it to be. It's very noticeable. You can also see in the photo on the left that there's a considerable amount of distortion in the photograph if you take that photo with an iPhone as opposed to a digital camera on the right. And the most important things to remember when you are taking your photograph is that it has to be shot in focus and at the angle that you desire, because those are two things that you can't change no matter how hard you try in Lightroom. You have to get that right when you're taking the photograph. So for example, this mug, I have the camera positioned slightly above the mug looking down so that I can get that back lip in focus, as well as show you a portion of the interior glaze. And my advice to you would be to take way more photos than you think you need, and every so often go back and zoom in on your camera to make sure that these photos are taken in focus, because the worst thing that can happen is you take 400 photographs and you go home to edit them only to find out that certain shots that you took are, like maybe you bumped the camera and they're out of focus, and then you have to remember what angle it is and go back and find that piece and rephotograph it. So it's better to take more photos than less. So some common problems that we can edit in Adobe Lightroom are we can edit the white balance. So the photograph on the left, I did not adjust my digital camera's white balance. It's very yellow, and I was able to return that to neutral with by just clicking one button. We can also adjust over or under exposure, so if your camera lens let in too little or too much light for all of your photographs, that's an easy fix in Lightroom. We can also reduce glaring highlights to reveal obscured details, and we can brighten dark shadows to reveal those details as well. If you're photographing on a gray backdrop, sometimes they can appear washed out or have that horizon line I was talking about. We can fix that in Lightroom as well. And you might be able to tell with this white background that the left side is the original photograph. There's sort of a hue to it. If I were to put this on a website, you would be able to see the corners of my image. It would not integrate seamlessly. So we're able to blow out that white background in Lightroom. We can also get rid of scratches and dust on your backdrop or your piece. And we can tweak individual colors without interrupting other ones. So for example, in this central photograph, I've targeted only the yellow in this image and then adjusted it either toward red or green on the spectrum. So the first thing that I do is, let me make sure that this is playing. No. The first thing that you want to do when you open up Lightroom is you want to get your photos in there to edit them. And to do that, you need to import them. But I'm not sure if this is playing. Okay, so we go up to the top and click on File and click on Import Photos and Video. And then on the very left side of the application, you can see Source. This is where you're going to get your photos from, either from your thumb drive, your SD card, or your Pictures folder if you've saved them in there. To get to your Pictures folder, you have to open up your hard drive here and go to Users. Because I'm voicing over these videos, I kind of have to keep going, but you can get this full tutorial at the end, so don't worry if I'm going too quickly. You can get it later. So here's my SD card, and it automatically selects all of these photos, so I'm going to uncheck them, and then just choose the ones that I want by clicking that little box in the top left of each image, and then going down to the bottom right and clicking Import. In the top left, you can see that they're uploading. If you did take raw photographs and you took a lot of them, this could take some time, so be patient. And once they're all finally uploaded, we have to go up to the Develop tab, which is right next to Library at the top here. And it's under the Develop tab that we're going to actually be doing all of our editing using these panels located to the right of the image. So after I've imported my photographs, okay, I think this one's gonna work. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to edit everything here on the right under the Basics tab. And I'm going to do that to the first photograph in my batch of photographs that I've taken with the same camera settings, because a lot of the time the problems that you have with your first photo are going to be the problems you have all the way through till your last photo. So I'm going to adjust all of these sliders under the Basics tab for this photograph, and then I'm going to apply those settings to the rest of our images. And the first thing that I like to do is to adjust the white balance by clicking on the dropper tool here, and then selecting an area of the background that has to be a neutral gray, white, or black. And it might take a couple of clicks to find the true neutral, but lucky for me, it went on the first try. And then the next thing that I look for is, are all of my photographs over or underexposed, so too bright or way too dark? And if they are, you can adjust this slider here under exposure. But keep in mind that adjusting the exposure slider causes more damage to your pixels than using a more subtle adjustment, such as the highlights or shadow sliders below. These sliders here will only target either the bright areas or dark areas of your image, and you can get more subtle, fine-tuned adjustments. So you can kind of play with these sliders and see what's working for your particular image. So I'm darkening my background shadows and also seeing how bright I would like my highlights to be, because I want the piece to pop out of the background. If you want, you can also try adjusting the black and white sliders. I like a bit of a darker image, so I usually adjust the black slider a little bit down so that my background is darker. And you can make either really harsh adjustments or really subtle ones, but the goal here is to create an image that looks as though it hasn't been edited. The clarity slider adjusts localized contrast, so if you slide it to the left, it gets like fuzzy, and if you slide it to the right, it increases that contrast. For my work, I leave it at 0, but if you have really textural pieces, it can be nice to make that texture pop by increasing the clarity. And the mug on this image in real life has very bright jewel tones, kind of neon glazes on it. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the vibrance and saturation up, but not too much. This is one of the ways that you can accidentally over-edit your image really easily. And our goal is to make it look as true to the original object as possible. So once you have your base layer of edits for your first image, it's time to synchronize these settings. And to do that, you're going to go up to Settings at the top, up here, and click on Copy Settings. And you want to make sure you have white balance, basic tone, clarity, treatment, and color. Anything that you have changed on that panel needs to be selected, and then you click copy and select all of the photos from your film strip that you want to apply these adjustments to before clicking sync in the bottom right. And then synchronize. I'll come back to it later, sorry. But as you can see, it has applied these settings to each individual image. So you don't have to go through and do this to every single one. You can just blanket layer all of these edits on top. So here you can see the before and the after without even having to touch any of these images. So I know I'm going through this really quickly. There is going to be a tutorial that you can download to get this with me voicing over these videos so you can go through them at your own pace. So don't worry about missing something. You can always get it later.
What camera do you use?
I use a Canon Rebel XSI. It's pretty old, so there's probably better ones out there, but yeah. So the next thing I like to do is to adjust all of the cropping on each individual image. And this is something that you'll have to do one by one. And so I go up here to our toolbar. The leftmost tool is our crop overlay tool. And you gotta drag this overlay around the image to leave enough negative space to allow the object to breathe, but you don't want so much space that it's kind of just floating out in the middle of nowhere. And if you're making a postcard or something where you need specific dimensions, you can select specific dimensions here or type them in yourself. But since I don't need anything specific, I go one by one and crop around each individual object. And then to straighten them, you have to click outside of the overlay and click and hold down your mouse and then drag either up or down to slightly alter the straightness of the image, like so. And then I'll go through and do this to every image that I've taken. If you've chosen to photograph on a gray or graduated backdrop, it can be kind of common to need to darken the top section of your image or brighten the bottom section of your image to create a more high contrast gradient. And we can do that pretty easily using the graduated filter tool, which is also on the toolbar above the basic tab. It's right here. This drop-down menu will adjust the overlay. So I'm going to think about my intention, and my intention here is to darken the shadows above the piece. So I've slid that slider to the left toward the darker side of the spectrum and layered that over the top third of the image to make that background darker. And I've clicked on New to create a new mask, and I'll keep layering these masks as many times as I need to in order to achieve a seamless blend. So now I'm going to change this mask to focus on brightening these highlights. So I've slid that highlight slider all the way to the right and then coated that layer over the bottom half of the image. And here I'm increasing the amount of light in the shadowy areas as well, because as you can see in this piece, it's quite dark down there. And now you can see that by using this tool, we've been able to create a darker top section and a brighter lower section to have higher contrast, as opposed to our original image, which is right here. So if you've chosen to photograph on a white background, as I mentioned earlier, it appears white to the naked eye, but in fact is not. So we are going to have to edit that white background to blow it out as much as possible. And to do that, we use the Radial Filter tool, which is similar, except it creates a radius, so a circle. And I have set that all the way down to -4 exposure. And this is just so I can see where I'm putting this mask. The shadowy area is the part that is going to be affected. So I'm going to expand that radius to make sure that that mask does not target the piece as much as possible. I'm only trying to target the background. So you can reduce the feathering or like the blurriness of this mask to pull it away from the edges of the piece so that you don't accidentally hit those corners and brighten them too much. And once you have it placed on the object, you want to slide the exposure all the way up. That will obliterate all of the color in the white areas of the image and create a true white. But as you can see, the edges of the object are very bright, so I need to use the adjustment brush, which is on the right side of the toolbar, to paint some localized editing over the edges of this image. So I've reduced the highlights, and I'm going to paint this mask just on the areas of the object where I want to reduce the highlights, and I'm trying to not hit that background. To see where you are laying the mask down, you have to press O on your keyboard, and then it shows up in red like this. And as you can see, I have accidentally targeted the background, so I've clicked on Erase, and then you use it just the same way. You're going to just erase anywhere where you've accidentally laid that treatment down where you didn't intend for it to be. So once you have that mask down, you can edit it. You can slide any of the sliders to change what you want. So you can try doing multiple edits. I like to keep it simple and only adjust a couple things at a time. But you can see what works for you. And then I'm going to add a new layer. And this time my intention is to brighten how dark the foreground of the piece is. So I've brightened those shadows and I'm painting that mask on, trying to not hit the background as much as possible. And brighten the shadow down there as well. And then erase anywhere that I didn't want that particular treatment to be. It's really important when you're editing to be fairly precise, because if you're layering these masks and you're accidentally hitting areas that you didn't intend, that's one of the ways that you can make it obvious that you've edited your image, and we don't want that. So I'm going to continue with localized editing with the adjustment brush. On this Ted Adler piece, you can see that the shadows on the bottom section of the piece are quite dark and they're obscuring some details. So I'm thinking about my intention with this brush tool, and I know I want to brighten the highlights and the shadows in the bottom half of the image, and I'm also going to add a new layer later on to reduce the amount of highlights on the shoulders because it's sort of blown out those details. So I'm painting this layer on, and I'm trying to be fairly precise, but as I'm painting it, I notice that the background behind it is quite dark, so I am going to go ahead and brighten any area that I think needs it. So I have targeted the background here, but it's not quite enough, so I'm going to add another layer. And you might have to do this over and over again if the image was particularly dark. So I click on New for a new layer, and then continue applying that mask until I'm satisfied with the way that it looks. And again, you can adjust your sliders as needed. I have increased the clarity to make that texture pop as well. So sometimes on forms like these, the highlights can be so bright that it ends up obscuring your details or making your image look a little washed out. So I'm going to reduce those highlights to make that color and texture pop back up. And you can see like how far you want to push it with that. But I want there to be enough light there to create a sense of volume, but not so much that I'm wondering what color the shoulders of the piece are. And then because in this photo, I took this photo myself, so I know that this object has more vibrant colors to it. So I'm going to go ahead and paint another mask on there that adjusts the saturation of the piece by increasing it just slightly, but I don't want to increase the saturation of the background, otherwise I would have just adjusted this in the Basics tab to begin with. So this is just another layer that you can do, but it's optional and it'll depend on your piece. And then I'll go through and again erase anywhere that I didn't intend to hit. So once you have all of these multiple layers, there's these dots on your piece. And if you want to see what you did in each mask, you can click on these dots, and on the right side it will show you what sliders you've adjusted. You can go back and edit those sliders if you click on these dots to edit where you've put this mask. You can also delete masks if you want to without having to completely start over. And the last thing I'll show you with the adjustment brush is how to get rid of these scratches on your backdrop. So just like when we were editing the shadows in the piece, I want to make sure that I'm being fairly intentional with where I am applying the mask. So I'm going to only target the background and not the edges of the piece. And to help do that, I click on Auto Mask. And in a perfect world, Auto Mask would not target the object. It would only target like areas of the image, but because my box here is so similar in tone to the background, it accidentally targets it, so I'm gonna have to go back in and erase that. But this is sort of, if you click on Auto Mask, it's sort of a way to very quickly be able to brush these layers on without targeting areas that you don't intend. But I do have to go back again and erase. And it's important to know that when you are reducing the clarity of your background, you really do not want to hit the edges of your piece and make them look too fuzzy. So I leave this like dark halo around it so that I absolutely don't accidentally make it look overly edited. And you might have to zoom in for this as well to get it precise. So now all those scratches are gone. Spot removal tool is similar to the adjustment brush, but it works in a different way. I hope you can see all those dust specks on the screen. Those are from the camera lens. And I'm going to use the spot removal tool to remove those. The way that this tool works is when you click on an area of your image that you don't like, the software will replace that area of the image with one that is very similar. And I always make my tool as small as I possibly can to replace the part in question. If you make it too big, it will end up not integrating as seamlessly. And so it's selecting parts of the image that it thinks is the same, but sometimes it's not quite what I am looking for, or in this case, it's selecting other pieces of dust. So I have to click and drag that secondary location to change it. So it might take a couple of tries before you can get a seamless looking edit. And I do have to zoom in to use this tool in problem areas. This doesn't just apply to dust on your camera lens. You can also use this for smudges on your piece, crumbs on your backdrop, fingerprints. And you can use it over edges as well, like so. Another really interesting thing that Lightroom is capable of is it can edit individual colors in your image. So, for example, you want to scroll down. Here's your hue, saturation, and luminance panel. So, for example, on this pot, if I think that the green on the cactus is far too blue or far too green, I can choose that color on the sliders, which in this case is aqua, and I can slide the hue either toward the more yellow side of the spectrum, like so, or toward the more blue side of the spectrum, without disturbing any of the other colors. And I'm showing you some pretty harsh adjustments just so you can see what I'm talking about, but normally you don't want to edit your image into being something that it's actually not, so you would only slide these very slightly if something is off. If I think that the green for some reason is way too saturated, you can desaturate by sliding it all the way to the left. And the luminance section of the panel is how much light is behind the particular color in question. So this looks like it's glowing. If I want to reduce that glow, you can slide the luminance to the left or slide it to the right to make it glow more. So once you're finally done editing, it's time to export your photographs so that you can actually use them. And to do that, what you're going to do is select all of your photographs from the film strip at the bottom, and then go up to the top of your screen and click on File and Export. At the top here, you can choose your location for your files. If you want, you can put them into a subfolder as well. I'm going to go in here and select this folder that I've already made. This is where my files are going to go after they export. Under File Settings, I have them to save as a JPEG, and I keep the quality at 100%. And really important is image sizing. My personal preference is to resize to fit the long edge to 2000 pixels at 300 dpi, dots per inch. That's the highest that I would save these at. They're very large files. I always select don't enlarge. So for example, if you took this photo with your iPhone, it might blow it up really big and then it will look fuzzy. You don't want that. If your computer is fairly small, the smallest I would save these at is 1200 on the long edge. That's a really common size that I've had to submit images to like juried exhibitions for. They often ask for that 1200 pixels on the long edge. And then they'll slowly export, and you should be able to find them in the folder that you've chosen to save them to. So some things that I like to think about when I'm editing is the edited image true to the original? This is our #1 priority. You don't want to be editing your objects into something that they actually aren't. It's sort of the equivalent of going to see your favorite band only to find out that they are terrible live, and the only reason why they sounded good was because they were on a highly produced album. You don't want that. And you want to make sure that your image is straight in focus and shot at the correct angle. You want your piece to be lit appropriately, and by that I mean you don't want any shadowy or bright areas that are obscuring any details. You want your audience to know exactly what is going on. The gradient should be seamless, so no horizon lines. You want your white backgrounds to be pure white. We want to eliminate all distractions and just have the emphasis be on the piece. So remove all those dust and smudge marks. And you want it to be cropped to allow some negative space. So I know that I went through this crazy fast, which is why I'm going to be sending the full tutorial out to my newsletter, which you can sign up for at my website here. I will also be releasing tutorials in the future on how to set up a photo booth, either at your house or at your studio. If you're interested in that, please sign up. If you have questions, you can email me or come talk to me in person. So thank you for attending.